Hi, my name's Carter, and today I'm going to show you how to sell your NFTs or your tokens for your Web3 app with US dollars using Bubble, DropChain, and the Stipe integration. This is 100% no code, and if you haven't yet, please start by watching the video linked below on how to set up your Bubble app. This goes through your Bubble app itself, your DropChain developer account, and as a preface, you do need to have a paid developer account for part of this tutorial. This is something that Bubble requires. So I would recommend you build your full Web3 app first, and then come back here when you're ready to integrate Stipe and integrate a credit card on-ramp to save some money in credit card fees and SaaS fees to pay for these tools. We're also going to modify this partially when we're ready to launch our app, but for now, just sort of as an educational flow, we're going to hard code some stuff and we'll get this tested out and show you how this works. First of all, I'm going to go and I'm going to make a new page within a Bubble app. I'm gonna just create a templated one. I'm gonna use some templated stuff we've created before, but I'm gonna show you exactly how it works. And this is from the marketplace example where we have two test accounts. We've minted some assets to the marketplace account, and then we walked through the process of sending some tokens from a user account and then buying something through a swap. We're actually just gonna take some of these pieces and we're actually using a different stuff. So some of the different apps, some of this, the green text is just modified for our app. But we're gonna grab the button and then the repeating group so we can query what users' apps, or rather what users' assets are in our test accounts. So let's just say we're gonna grab test user, let's just say test user assets. I'm probably gonna use a different test account here in a moment, but I'll show you kind of how that goes. We're going to copy this repeating group, and there is some coloring things that I'm going to change just so that we can see everything fully. Let's see. Change the color of the text. Perfect. Okay, so because we copied this from before, I'm just gonna kind of run through the full example of how we're going to grab our test user assets. We're gonna create a workflow. And then we're going to do an asset indexer, which again, asset indexer allows you to grab the assets that your end user has. In this case, we're going to be using our test accounts. So we're going to go to the console, which is console.dropchain.network. If you haven't yet, create a free developer account, and then you can come back to this and continue to use your version of your information. So in this case, we have an app ID. So we're going to copy that. We're going to put that into the app ID field. And then user1 user ID is the account that we're grabbing the assets for. And so we're actually going to use test user 5 just to make sure that this is a separate account. If you have other assets on this, that's fine. That's not a problem. We're going to use test user 5. If you haven't yet, we're going to go to the bank.testnet.algorand.network, and this is going to send some testnet gas to our account. So we're going to actually go to the console. We're going to copy the wallet address for test user 5 here. We're going to paste it in, and success. We have sent some gas to our test user 5, so that when we do send a transaction or we do request to view the assets for one of our user IDs, there is there's something that we get back. We see how much gas we have. And then finally, we're going to grab the user ID for test user 5, and we're going to include it within the user ID section. We're also going to set the state of the page. So, state of an element, we have this called Stipe integration page. We're just going to call it that. We're going to create a custom state, and this is exactly like the marketplace example. We're going to have user1 asset IDs. It's going to be a list of numbers. We're going to create another state, which is user one asset amounts. This is going to be a number list as well. Okay, and then we're going to grab the result of step one, user one assets, each item's asset IDs, or each item's asset ID. And then we're going to do the same thing. This is step one, user one assets, each item's amount. So what we're doing here is we're grabbing what are the assets from, in this case, be hard coded our test user 5. We're grabbing the result of this objects, the user one assets, each item's asset ID, and we save it to the list of numbers. The same thing for each item's amount. So we're grabbing the asset ID, unique to each asset, token or NFT, and then how much do they own? And that should be good. And so we can go and we're gonna go and we're gonna preview this, and we're gonna click grab test user assets. Oh, and I just forgot, before I get too far ahead of myself, we actually have to connect the repeating group that we copied. You can also just create your own repeating group if you didn't make this before. You can make sure the type of content is number, and then you're gonna grab from the Stipe integration page, and then you're gonna grab the user one asset IDs as the data source. And this is just gonna say if there's 10 user or asset IDs, we're gonna have 10 cells within this repeating group. We're also gonna grab some text, and we're gonna have some custom dynamic data here. This is gonna be pretty easy to change for us because we've already pre-made this, but I'll walk through this again. What I'm doing is I'm just changing the page here, and don't worry if this doesn't make sense, I'll explain it right now. So we've saved 2 states to the page. We have this page, Stipe integration. We have the user one asset IDs, which is the state we've just made. And we also have the item number, current cells index number, or cells index. And what this means is it says, we're grabbing from this list of asset IDs, we're grabbing the number of the item. Maybe we're going to grab the 5th element within that list, and we're going to make sure it matches which cell index we have. So if there's, we're on cell number 1 right here, we're going to grab item number 1 based off of the first cell index. For cell 2, we're going to grab item number 2, and so on. And so we did the exact same thing for amount. In asset ID, we're just driving the user one asset IDs. And for amount, we're just grabbing user one asset amounts. So we repeat that for both times. And what this is gonna do is for each cell, we're gonna repeat this. So if we have 10 assets, we'll show 10 cells with 10 asset IDs and 10 amounts. And what this is gonna allow you to do is it's going to allow you to grab and show the test user assets that we have, right? So in this case, we have this asset ID, we own 500 of them. This is from testing this to kind of make sure this flow would work, which isn't a problem. This is pretty simple. We're also, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, we're gonna go and we're gonna mint an asset. Now, this is on the tutorial app that I made in the video linked below. If you want to go through that and get familiar with DropChain and Bubble and building your first no-code Web3 app, I would strongly recommend it. But for the sake of this Stipe integration, I'm going to kind of simplify this, and I'm going to mint my own NFT here. So again, this is the flow how this works on a high level. We have the mint NFT button here, and then we have the transaction ID and the success. And what we've done here is we've saved a state transaction ID and success to the mint NFT button. If we go to the workflow here, here's what we're doing. We're grabbing the asset, or doing asset mint on the testnet transaction when someone clicks the button. We're creating this transaction ID. We're saving it from result of step 1. This is all from your DropChain dashboard. So like if this is the user one test ID or user one test account that you have, and then this is the app ID here, and so we're just minting an NFT. In this case, let's call it Stipe tokens. We're gonna call it Stipe coins, sure, right? And we're gonna make 1 million of them. In our case, we're going to use user 1. That's fine. We're going to have the app ID here. Everything else looks fine. We're going to have no, you can't split them up. The coins can't be divisible. From here, we're gonna make a new transaction, create a new thing. It's called DropChain transaction. We're saving the asset ID here. We're saving the transaction ID, and then we're also verifying if this is successful. So we'll be successful if there is a transaction ID. If the transaction ID is not empty here. No, if it is empty. And then we set the state to the button so that it renders on the front end. This whole flow has been explained in the video below. I strongly recommend taking a look at that if you're confused at any of this. But with this in mind, we're gonna click preview, and then we're just gonna click mint an NFT. And so using the information we just configured, we're gonna mint the asset. It says mint NFT here, but we've made, I think, 1 million tokens, 1 million coins in this case. So that's not entirely accurate. From our previous tutorial, we were making NFTs, but you could use an NFT if you wanted, right? If you wanted to sell an NFT, you could just make one, or make, say, 100, a batch of 100, and then you send them off to whoever buys. I'll go Explorer. What we're going to do here is we're going to grab the transaction ID, go to the testnet.algoexplorer.io, and we're going to paste this in here. And we can clearly see we have an asset called Stipe. We have Stipe coins. Here's the unique asset ID, which is the important thing we want to save here. We've made 1 million. Everything here lines up exactly with what we are expecting. So cool. We can use this as the coin we are going to sell when someone buys something through the Stipe integration here. So let's go, and in this case, we'll just save this for now. We'll have this as the token we want to send. And then what we're going to do is we are going to create a button. We're going to make this button right here. We're going to just copy this. We're going to say buy 500 coins. And this buy 500 coins button is going to open up an external website that we don't have defined yet, but we're going to define right now. And so for this point, we're now going to make a Stipe account. So we have the bubble side done, at least the front end part, where we can see the amount of assets that they own. All right, and so now we're going to create a Stipe account. You'll be able to create an account. I'm using a test account, so this is going to be all in the test version. When you're ready to go to the live version, you'll just have to toggle some of these configurations and update your fields. But because I've already created a Stipe account, I'm going to go here. All right, so for our example, there's a bunch of ways you could do this. What we're going to do is we're going to create a no-code checkout page. We're going to, with that, create a product. So it's going to be a test product. And then we're going to show you how to integrate this into your Bubble app so that when someone goes to this page, they check out, then we can process that payment and then also deliver their assets through the DropChain plugin on Bubble. So let's create a payment link. I have a test payment link here active. We're just going to create a new one. If you wanted to do a subscription service, you could do this here, right? Right now, we're just going to do a one-off version. We're going to add a new product. We're going to call it, DropChain coins. So maybe we have 500 coins. Let's just say 1,000 coins, maybe. Let's say 500, because I think I might have used that earlier. 500 coins for my DropChain Web3 app. So maybe you have a game, you want to sell 500 coins, and this is sort of like an in-app purchase. We deliver those tokens to that end user, and then we can sell it for, say, $5. You could also do an NFT here. You could also make this recurring. So if you wanted to make it an NFT that they earn as sort of like it gives them a monthly access to your community, and then it charges them continuously based off of, if they want to continue to use this NFT, that could be an example of this as well. Or maybe every recurring charge, we give them a new NFT to say, yes, here's 1 month extra or 1 additional month access to my content, access to my community, whatever that may be. me, you can do this here as well. Right now, we're just going to do a one-time charge. So we're going to have DropChain coins. You're buying $5 worth of them. It's 500 coins. And we're going to create a link. And perfect. So something we're going to add to this link is something called a client reference ID. And so what a client reference ID allows you to do is to pass special information into the URL so that when someone checks out, you can grab that. And what we're going to do is we're going to grab the user ID, the DropChain user ID of the person who has checked out. And then we're going to grab it after the transaction has completed, use that as the user ID we need to send the NFT or the coins to, and then we can send it knowing who bought the asset. If you had this on a live version, this is what you're going to change. We'll show you a hardcode version for now. I'm just going to put the letter D and then we'll alter it based off of what we want to have here. I'm going to bring this down. And then what you want to do is you want to go to settings if you haven't done this already. And this is where this paid version requires you to do stuff. You can go to your API and then you're going to check the Enable Workflow API and Backend Workflows checkmark box. This will give you a root URL. Once you click the API button, you have the ability to click the checkbox to enable API and backend workflows. We're going to have to check this. This does require a paid subscription to do this, which is why I recommend you start by building everything else and then doing this later, because this is when you're going to have to start paying for it. And then from there, you have the ability to create backend workflows. This was the test API workflow I've created. I'm going to create a new one and I'm going to just show you from scratch how we built it out. We're going to create a new API workflow. We're going to call it Stipe transaction process. Let's just say process Stipe transaction, maybe make it in English. We're going to check both of these boxes to run without authentication. And then we're going to ignore privacy rules and run this workflow. And then we're going to change the manual definition to detect request data. It'll open up a detect request data. And then this is an initialization URL. We're going to copy this and we're going to go back to Stipe. We're going to open up the developer section. And so we've tried this a couple times. We're going to go and we're going to create a new webhook. You can see we've tried this a couple times here. We're going to add this endpoint URL. We're going to paste this. And then we're going to add for a specific event. It should be checkout session completed, which shows you only the checkout sessions that have been fully completed. And then that's when you want to end up sending the transaction on DropChain. We're going to add this endpoint, not a valid URL. Oh. Yeah, that's weird. I don't know why they... Okay, something I've noticed is that they, you should make sure that the API workflow name has underscores, because for some reason they allow you to include spaces, and you can't have spaces in a URL. So that is correct. That is not a valid URL. We're going to add that fixed endpoint here, and then now we're going to test out the flow. We're going to initialize the bubble side, minimize that. We're going to go through and we're going to we're actually going to duplicate this tab such that we can go and change the buy NFT or buy 500 coins button. We're going to go to Stipe integration. This is the page we just made. And then we're going to open up the external website, and then we're going to go back to Stipe and we're going to grab that link. Make sure I have the client reference ID here. Copy that. We're gonna delete that extra D. So we have the link, and then we have the client reference ID URL parameter attached to it. And we're gonna go to the console. We're gonna grab our user ID for test user 5, right? This is hard coded. Like I mentioned earlier, you're gonna wanna make sure, which tab is it? You're gonna wanna make sure that you include this part as dynamic data based on the user who is actually making the purchase. So if depending on how you want to make your app, there's a couple ways. One way is when someone logs in, you just save that in your URL as a URL parameter, and then you grab it from the URL. I have examples of how to do that in a couple different tutorials, also linked below. There'll be a bunch of bubble tutorials if you have any questions on this, or also if you have any questions throughout this process, join the Discord link below. Hit me up at Kraz, C-R-A-Z, or at NoTech Nathaniel, my co-founder. Ask us any questions in the Discord. We're happy to answer. But if you have a bubble account here, you can also save the user ID for the person who's signed in, and then you can grab that from the current user who's using your bubble app. Right now, we're just going to hard code it, and then we're going to open this in a new tab. And then from there, I believe that was 2 of them. So we can do a couple things. We're going to grab the user assets just to kind of show this process working. And then we're going to buy 500 coins. And what you should see here is the checkout link for the product you just made. $5, you get 500 coins. And then from here, because this is the test mode like you've seen, okay, cut out that drop down, please, Nate. Because it's the test mode that you've seen, you can just spam any email, like doing the 424242. Yeah, please blur that out, Nate. And then make sure that you just put any qualified credit card information here that you want. Yeah. And then you can hit pay. And this is still running, and it just processed the event. So what happened here is I went through Stripe, I purchased this test mode version of my product. Stripe then sent a API request to the bubble URL we created for the webhook. So you can see all of this information is included here as a reference for us to use when someone processes a payment. So we're going to save that. And then before we get any farther ahead, we're going to go back to this webhook we created, and we're going to update the details and then just remove the /initialize. And this is just used for initialization. So from now, we'll just be sending the transaction back to the actual API workflow here, which is the process Stripe transaction. All right, so there's a few things now that we need to do. The first thing is that we need to validate that the transaction actually happened when we receive a request, right? So like, what if someone were to send us a request that has already, maybe it's fake and it has a bunch of fake data. We just need to check with Stripe that this data makes sense. So we're going to go to the API connector section, and we're going to create a API name. We already have Stripe here. I'm going to make it again just so that I can show you exactly how this works. Okay. So we're going to have authentication as private key in the header, bearer, and then we're going to bearer space. This is sort of the convention that's supposed to be used. This is how you show the header value. And then what you can go here is you can go into your developer section, API keys, and then click secret key, reveal test key, and then you can copy that. In our case, I'm not going to show you it because, keep this key secret, but it'll look exactly like this. It'll be sk_test. Just click review key, copy it, and then paste it after this section. All right, and so once you've pasted in your key value there, we're going to add another API call. And we're going to call it something like validate checkout. To check that this transaction has actually occurred, I'm going to validate it. We're going to use it as an action, And we're going to get, and we're going to shoot it to this URL. So you can copy this here. Basically what this is this is the Stripe APIs, right? We're grabbing the checkout sessions that match this parameter, right? We do the brackets to say checkout session ID in brackets. And then this key allows us to pass in anything, any checkout ID that we get from the payload that is sent to us from Stripe. And so in this case, uncheck private, because this will allow us to send this through the workflow. We can actually add fields. So if you successfully initialized your payload or your endpoint here, after we have changed this, we've removed the /initialize from the endpoint URL, so it doesn't have that anymore. You get this response, right? We can see that this was successful. It says 200 which is good. Here's the message. It said it was successfully initialized. In this case, we're actually going to grab this data object and ID here. We're going to copy this, and we're going to put this right into the value section to initialize our own API call. And if this was successful, which ours was, you can see all of the same information from the transaction that we just processed, but again, and this was returned from Stripe from Stripe to us with an API call. See all this information here that is included, kind of to show you the process. We're going to save that. We can delete the value because we're actually going to change that going forward. And then we're going to do our first step in this API workflow for processing Stripe transactions. And so the first thing is we're going to go to plugins, where we have the API connector. And I believe it's the same thing. We're going to Stripe validate checkout. We have two of them because I did a test one beforehand, but you'll just have one of them. And you have this path variable for checkout session. We're going to insert dynamic data. We're going to do request data, which is from the API workflow itself. And we're going to grab the object ID, which is the checkout session ID. Then, after that, we're going to create a new thing. And this new thing is going to be a Stripe checkout. We already have one here. Basically, we're going to create 3 fields. We're going to create a session ID, and that session ID, I'm gonna make a new one. I'm gonna make this just completely obvious. Stripe checkout, test checkout. You can just call it checkout for now, but we're gonna create a session ID field, which is a string or text. We're gonna create a session type, which is also text. I'm gonna create a client reference ID, which is also text. So here are 3 fields, and I'll kind of describe what they mean and why they're important. The session ID is the unique checkout. So if I checked out 5 times, I'm gonna have 5 unique session IDs, and each of these is gonna have to be tracked so that we make sure that, well, one person didn't send one request 5 times and then get 5 DropChain, like five issues of a payment, 500 coins. They got 4 transactions and only paid for 1. So this session ID will be sort of a check to make sure that there's not more than one example of a completed checkout being processed. We're going to call result of step 1's ID. Session type is going to be result of step 1's object. And what this is it's saying checkout.session.completed. That's the event type. So if I were to go through Stripe and not check out, it'd be a checkout session ended or something like that, right? It wouldn't be complete. We only want to pay for completed session types. Checkout.session.completed. And then client reference ID, if you remember that from the beginning, is the user ID for the DropChain account that we're sending it to. So we're going to grab from step 1, then we're going to grab the client reference ID. We're just saving this to our database. We are going to have a conditional though. We only want to do this if, when we do a search, We only want to do this if there are no other Stripe test checkout or Stripe checkouts in our case before, but checkouts that match the session ID. So we're going to do a search for Stripe test checkout. In our case, we want to search the same thing. And you'll want to change this and remake to a new database when you're ready to actually have real, we can do Stripe live checkouts or Stripe production checkouts that you'll use for your own version. And we want to do a search for session ID that is equal to the result of step one's ID. And so what it's saying, all right, we're going to do a search for checkouts, and we're going to look at matching Stripe test checkout items that match the session ID, the unique variable for completed transactions. We're good there. And if this search has a count greater than 0, or whether, let's just say, is 0, we're only going to do this add to our database if there is 0 matches. So what this is saying, we're going to do a search for checkouts that match this session ID, and we only do it if the count of our search, how many results we get back, is 0. So there are no matches because this is a unique transaction that has been validated by Stripe. All right. Okay. So we've done this and we're almost done. We're finally to the point where we are ready to make a actual DropChain response to this. We've validated that there's an actual transaction that is legitimate by Stripe. We got a request, we validated it with Stripe, Stripe agrees, right? Then we made a checkout to check if there's been more than one request. If there's only one, cool, we're on step 3 now. Or rather, if this is the only one, there's no others, then we go on to step 3. And so for our case, again, we're hard coding these things, but let's say that you want to send some tokens to this person, right? You're going to use the beta endpoint. So beta means there may be bugs. If there are bugs, please check out the Discord, hit us up. Let me know if you're having any issues. There shouldn't be, but if there are, let me know. We're going to grab the app ID from your developer console. And in our case, when we minted, if we go back to this flow, we minted this with our test user 1. So we're going to send it from our test user 1. That's going to be sort of our account that owns all of the assets that we're sending. What's the asset ID? It's the Stripe coins we just made. Copy that. Paste that into there. What's the receiver ID? Well, that depends, right? Who is the client reference ID that made the initial request? We're going to go step 2's client reference ID, which has been the validated information. And how many are we sending them? We're sending them 500 because we're sending 500 coins to this to the end user. And so we have sent 500 amount from user 1, the person who minted it, to whoever purchased this asset. And then here's a few just very basic checks, basically, to make sure that, hey, is it successful? Is it not successful? And then we're not going to go super deep, but we're just going to give you the tools to check if this is successful. And if it's not, you should redo the workflow to make sure that it is actually being fulfilled. But we won't get too far in the nitty-gritties. We're going to create a new thing. We have a transaction, which is just I'm going to make a new thing. A brand new thing so that I can walk you through the process. Called DropChain transaction. We're going to set a field. We're going to do a field name transaction ID, which is text. And we're going to grab it from step 3's transaction ID. Then we're going to do one more thing. We're going to modify or change a result of step 4's DropChain transaction. We're going to have a success field, which is a yes or no. So what is this going to do? It's going to grab the transaction ID. So if there was a response from step 3, we're going to save it. And then step 4 is going to just check hey, we're going to say this is successful if the result of step 4, the airdrop transaction, the transaction ID is not empty, e.g. the transaction ID exists. We're going to copy this. So we have 2 of them now. We're just going to change this to say nope. And then transaction ID is empty. So we have a check. No matter what the result is it successful or not? We'll have yes or no. And then I'm not going to go any farther because this depends on how you want to do this. But I would recommend exploring, if it's not successful, maybe send an email to yourself or send an email to the person saying, hey, we're going to process this for you shortly. Or maybe retry the workflow. Say if it didn't work, go back to step 3, reattempt it, maybe try it 5 times. And if it doesn't work, go and then fill it manually yourself. For whatever reason, there may be something wrong with the way you set it up, or something on the back end, or something the customer did wrong that they don't know, or something that you should check into, because at the end of the day, this is real money, and so you want to make sure this transaction does go through successfully. We're not going to get into the nitty-gritties of Bubble and how this works, but this is sort of the basics, the boilerplate of how this process. And that's it for the back end, right? So we've done the front end, we've done the back end, and we've done the Stripe integration. So we've validated this whole flow, and there's probably a lot of improvements, and I just wanted to show you the basics. You could do stuff like checking against the request that you get from this backend workflow against all known Stripe IP addresses to make sure it comes from them. But for now, I would say that this is probably a great place to start, and then modify based off what your requirements are. We're going to test it. We're going to check it and make sure that it works, and we're going to show you specifically how this would normally work. Again, I'm going to go back to the front end, and we're going to open an external website. When I click the buy 500 coins, and notice how my client reference ID is this VU8, which if I go to the console is VU8, that's test user 5. So if we change that URL to grab something dynamic, again, that's going to be the point by which we can go through the process and send it to this different user, depending on what we have. It's hard coded now to show you this process and make sure you can get comfortable with setting it up. And then you can take this live and modify these and see fit. With that in mind, let's give it a whirl. We're going to refresh the page. I'm going to grab test user assets, and this will show you, okay, what are the assets, this test user 5 in our case, what are the assets they own. All right, we only have 1 asset, which is, we have 500 of them. Let's buy 500 of another coin. All right, so exactly like we've seen before. You do ya.net, 42424243 this time. I don't think, okay, yeah, it does require 42. 4242 is like the standard, standard just test card. I'm gonna do the 555, and then we're gonna pay. And so what's happening now? It's processing this payment. It's in test mode, so it'll go through, and then our backend should be processing and validating. Let's see if we go to data, we go to app data. I'll try test checkouts. It has a reference ID, check-in, session ID, session type. So that went through successfully. Let's take a look and go to our console or our dashboard, rather, this thing we made. Let's grab the test assets and see if there's another row. Okay, so I just troubleshooted a little bit, and I realized the error was because of the space here. So if you see something like this when you copy it, make sure, if you were to highlight, you can see this little space here, make sure there's no space. That will result in errors when you make the transaction. Something so small can cause issues. So if you do have any issues, like I said, join the Discord. We're happy to walk you through any problems and shall help you identify them and help you build your first Web3 app. And even the small things like this, you may have issues with. So as we go here, we're going to refresh this. We're going to grab the test user assets. You should still only see one thing here. Cool. Now we're going to buy 500 coins again. We're just going to go through the process of checking out. Again, use the 4242 repeating, and use this kind of filler information. And we should be successful. So let's grab the test user assets. And just like that, we have 500. We're gonna copy the asset and go to the testnet. And this matches the Stripe coins. So just like that, when I've checked out, it has successfully processed this. I only had a small hiccup there because of the space in the URL. Something that small can have issues. So you gotta be vigilant with it. But it worked perfectly. Let's try it again just to see this go up. We'll do the checkout again. As this just went through again, we will check it again. And just like that, we have earned another 500 tokens. As we see, it's been confirmed 20 seconds ago. And part of the reason why this is going through twice is because I have another version of this running on a different API workflow that you saw on the back end. So it's essentially running this twice. It's actually sending 2 airdrops, but we only configured 1. So make sure that if you go into the back end workflow here, we have 2 versions just to show this flow. This is the one we did. We can delete the other one and make sure that we only have 1. But in your case, you didn't make 2, so this is not a problem. And just like that, you have seen the process of how to build a mini indexer to grab the assets that your user owns. You can show this on your page how you want. Maybe you want to have something in the top corner that shows the asset ID and how much they own. You've set up a Stripe account and you've created a checkout page that allows you to buy some coins. And then you've created an API workflow through Bubble, Stripe, and DropChain that checks the request that is sent from Stripe, verifies it with Stripe, and then validates that there's only been one type of checkout like this before, and then sends an airdrop of an NFT or a token to one of your users. This allows you to sell NFTs, sell tokens, build a Web3 app, and then monetize this Web3 app with your credit card. This is 100% no code using this guide. I'm really excited to see what you can build with this. If you do have any questions, don't hesitate to join the Discord below. Create a free account at console.dropchain.network. You'll see this is the sign in here. This will log you into the dashboard. You hit API console on the left to get to the page we were just at. And ask us if you have any questions. If you want to build a certain project, you don't know how, you have some problems, let us know. Maybe we'll build a tutorial for you next. Thank you. Take care.